This is Love Notes, daily devotions from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Grace and peace to you. Our text today is Mark chapter 14, verses 53 through 72. It says, they took Jesus to the high priest. After they dragged him out of the Garden of Gethsemane, they gathered him before the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. Peter followed at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. He gets as close as he can without actually being with Jesus. And he's sitting with the guards, the temple guards, not the Roman guards, but those who work in the temple for the priests, warming himself at the fire. Now, we've seen before in Mark's gospel that he uses what we sometimes call insertions or sandwiches. There's the story of Peter. That's what we're starting out with. And we're going to come back to the story of Peter, and then shoved into the middle of that is going to be the story of the trial of Jesus before the chief priests. We've seen this literary device that holds two different stories in tension with one another, and they mutually interpret each other. That's what's kind of going on here, I think, as well. So Peter's been introduced, he's close at hand, and now the trial is going to take place. Now the chief priests and the whole council were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none, and that gets reiterated at several points in the next few verses. Their testimony doesn't agree. In order for testimony to be accepted in the courts of Jesus' time, you had to have at least two witnesses, and their testimony had to agree. It's not all that different today. Some stood up and gave false testimony against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.'" That's not really what Jesus said, is it? But then, when you're trying to make somebody an enemy, you can take everything they say out of context for your own purposes. You can lie, and you can put out misinformation that has no bearing on the truth. We see it in the news media all the time in our age. Politicians are masters anymore at misinformation. Social media runs rampant with it. This is what humans do. We lie. We make things up. And we do so right there in the face of God. Even on that point about the temple, though, they didn't really agree what he said. The high priest stands up finally because he's not getting anywhere. And he says, "Have you no answer? Have you no answer? What is it that they testify against you?" He's going to see if he can get Jesus now to turn on himself. But as it was prophesied in Isaiah, the 53rd chapter, he was silent and he did not answer. He wouldn't participate. Again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Blessed One here means God. It's a way of not uttering the holy name of God. You use other terms for God. Are you the Messiah, the Son of God? Now Jesus speaks. Remember, through the whole Gospel of Mark, Jesus, whenever somebody said, "You are the Messiah," or "You are the Son of Man," or worshiped him, he told them to keep silent. Well, now, chapter 14, verse 62, finally, Jesus says, "I am." I am, which is in Greek the holy name of God, Yahweh. I am, he finally claims the title of Messiah and the Son of God. And then he says, "And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the power," another name for God, "and coming with the clouds of heaven." Jesus has now finally broken the silence and claimed that he is indeed the Messiah. Well, in response to that, giving an answer, the high priest tore his clothes and said, "Why do we still need witnesses? You all heard what he just said. You have heard his blasphemy." Blasphemy is to undermine the name of God and the image of God. It is to speak evil using the name of God. So you've heard this blasphemy. What is your decision? And all of them condemned Jesus as deserving death. They began to spit upon him, to blindfold him, to strike him, to scream at him, to prophesy, to laugh at him. And then the guards took him and beat him. Jesus has told them the truth. And what he receives is a beating, humiliation, and the outrage of those who are in charge. Now we go back to Peter. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. And we're going to have a succession of 3 people who come and they say, "You're one of Jesus' disciples, one of the 12. And Peter is going to say, "No, I'm not." He's going to swear that he is not. The cock crows once after the first denial. Then he denies him 2 more times as people come forward and say, wait a minute. You sound like a Galilean. You've got a Galilean accent. You dress like a Galilean, a fisherman from out there in the hinterlands. And he again cursed and swore an oath. "I do not know this man that you are talking about. I do not know him." At that moment, the cock crowed for a second time, and Peter remembered that Jesus had said, "Before cock crows twice today, you will deny me 3 times." And he broke down and wept. Now, these 2 stories interpret one another. What do we know? What's common between them? What we know is Peter said, "I do not know the man." The high priest says pretty much the same thing. Confronted by God, who he invokes with great piety, he does not know who Jesus is. "I do not know the man" is a denial for Peter, but also a confession that he never really knew who Jesus was in the first place. It's also a revelation of the priests and the officials who really aren't going to know Jesus at all. This is not what they wanted or hoped for. They do not know the man. They do not know God. And that's what holds these 2 stories together, is that whether you're an insider in one of the 12 or whether you're the enemy of Jesus out in the public, both of them fall into the same category as people who don't know God, when God is standing right before us. And I wonder if we can pray this day that we might have eyes and ears open enough to know God in Jesus, to know what he's about, what he's up to, and to trust that the Messiah has indeed come. Amen.